is Dr. Amy Levy. I am a proud member of the Editorial Board of the Psychoanalytic Quarterly. I am also co-chair of the American Psychoanalytic Association's Commission on Artificial Intelligence, co-chair of the Subcommittee Artificial Intelligence for the International Psychoanalytic Association Committee Psychoanalysis and Technology, and author of the soon-to-be released book, The New Other: Alien Intelligence and the Innovation Drive. I am very excited to be here today with Dr. Frank Marra. Dr. Marra is a psychoanalyst and a psychotherapist in Toronto, Canada, a member and instructor at the Toronto Institute and Society for Psychoanalysis. He is a reviewer for the Canadian Journal of Psychoanalysis. He holds degrees in psychology and social work, and he is an appreciated contributor to the Quarterly. So, Dr. Marra, you are a clinical psychoanalyst and a film analyst. And in our conversations, I've discovered that you had a career at one point hosting a film review show in Canada called Flick. In addition to this wonderful paper, you've explored other films psychoanalytically, such as a very keen piece linking Francis Ford Coppola's early life trauma to the representations of agony and horror in his films. Can you tell us just a bit about how you came to this interesting career, blending psychoanalysis and film, and what you enjoy about it?
Well, Amy, good to be with you today to kind of talk about these things. So on the front of psychoanalysis and film, with psychoanalysis, I had an encounter late in adolescence, which was very powerful. In the sense, it was my first university course on psychoanalysis, and I found the language very compelling. It was compelling, and it offered avenues of both thinking and experience about subjectivity. On which point, I came across this recently where Thomas refers to Freud as a great romantic. I think that part of that is true. Certainly, one line in psychoanalysis pursues Freud as a romantic, and very prioritizing of subjectivity, and I think that that's what kind of very much appealed to me in terms of possibilities and in terms of potential for elaboration. I'm not so sure I was completely conscious of all of that, but something resonated deeply. I could say that a similar story existed for film, although it came much earlier in my life, but certain experiences with film were very deeply moving for me. I remember being a kid and having a film stick around in my mind for days afterwards. And that sort of evocation would typically allow for an elaboration of some small understanding of the human condition that was very exciting to me. And I do believe, as written about by a number of people, there's a strong cross-section between psychoanalysis and film. Of all the applied psychoanalytic points of focus, many might say that film is quite most adapted to psychoanalysis. So I kind of naturally find myself, well, naturally, it's something that certainly has happened. I've found myself interested in both, and particularly interested in the potentials for the cross-section. What is the borderland between these two things?
Oh, interesting. It's clearly in this piece that you've written, we can see how you're applying psychoanalytic thinking and psychoanalytic experience, your experience, as a clinician to understanding the film. Do you find that film also helps you in your clinical work?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, when the audience member, the spectator, goes to a film in a right state of mind, you get insights about the human condition, and I'm certainly committed to the idea that I bring these insights in some ways, sometimes deliberate, sometimes not so clear, into work with a vast variety of patients. With this film, I think it's distinctly an example of that, because I feel certain that I've had two patients in analysis who spent quite a bit of time trying to make sense out of a particular object in the world. And I do believe when I was kind of getting the inclination to write this paper, that was some of the early evocation of, what kind of pushed me forward wanting to explore this further.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So, but say a bit more, because the question I was about to ask you had to do with, there just being so many films to choose from, and wanting to understand why this one, seemed to surface for you as one worthy of the amount of attention that you've given to it.
Well, my thought. Again, I'm not sure I have the clearest of answers for this because I think I was saying to you earlier in another conversation. I'm not so sure. I chose the film as the film chose me in a certain way. I had a response to the film that got me moving. I guess I could phrase it this way. There's an old clinical adage, which is, well, you really just have to listen deeply to the patient, which I find a little comical because I experience the patient as a variety of distinct positions and voices. So then my rebuttal to that is, okay, but which patient are we listening to? So in this film, we've got a protagonist who's having distinctly different reactions to this novel object. And I think that that's what stirred something inside of me that I might have something modest to contribute to understanding this film. Because, when you watch her, that's certainly part of the developmental arc and the journey of Theodore.
Great. Yeah, we're going to get into that in quite a bit of detail, I hope, today. So you note at the start of your paper that since the film's release in 2014, it has captured the psychoanalytic imagination. So you're not alone in feeling this way. And you reference the work of Margulies, Lemma, Crespo, Nafo, among many others. And you write that among this corpus of work, quote, many psychoanalytic themes and concerns are pursued, including loss on the route to maturation, parallels between virtual and transitional space, autistic retreats, otherness, perversion, as well as disembodied relating. So it's the end of the quote. You write,
which I do believe are all vibrant and alive in this film. Those are all legitimate territories for exploration.
Yeah. It's clear that you appreciate that and that you help the reader, you orient the reader in what you'll be doing that's distinct. So along those lines, you say that your inquiry extends the corpus by exploring the film's protagonist and his meeting, as you've said a moment ago, with a novel object. So you argue that the AI Samantha functions as a radically novel object for the protagonist, Theo. And then you make this interesting connection that that parallels what we experience in psychoanalysis. Both patient and analyst are presented with an opportunity to make meaning out of a radically novel object in the psychoanalytic encounter. So I would just be interested in having you expand on that a bit more, the links that you draw between the relationship, in the film and the psychoanalytic enterprise and relationship.
Yeah, I guess some of my thoughts, and a few of which I was able to speak to in the paper, kind of some clear and obvious points. This is a radically novel object, so the protagonist lives, at least for a period of time, in this liminal space, and I see that in analysis. Also, clear and obvious, the voice is disembodied here. Samantha doesn't have a body. And in analysis, of course, as an analyzan, you're also responding to a disembodied voice. Now, I'll be very specific here. In the film, desire is initiated and up and running, but it can't be consummated at a certain level. Again, when we think of the analytic experience, which is very intimate and deep, the same framework holds, is that we're going to explore and think about these things that are very, activating and exciting and sometimes erotic, but we're not going to act on it. All of those kind of produce a parallel frame, at least in my thinking, with the film and the psychoanalytic frame. Also, the more I get along in my work as an analyst, the more I get wedded to the importance of the frame. Many years ago in my training, we did a lot of clinical focusing on the importance of the frame. And I remember thinking, wow, we're really spending too much time here. But the further I go along in analysis, more and more wedded I get to the importance of, no, it's important for the frame to hold in a very specific way because you want to create a singular opportunity and experience for the patient. It's in that singularity that some of the power of psychoanalysis rises to the surface.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice the way you're framing it. It's almost like protecting a space and an experience.
Yeah, protecting it, designing it, and
Mhm.
constantly attending to it.
Mhm. That's great.
I would say if I have a struggle as an analyst, it's and I think that this is very important. I become more and more wedded to it as I go along, as I have to worry about not over gratifying the patient. So I think very easily I would consider myself an active analyst, but my learning and growth is to curtail that and to limit that. Why? Because of the importance of the frame. I don't want to disclose too much, and you want to create space for the person to evolve and demonstrate themselves, and also, of course, for the transferences to rise to the surface.
I feel like there's a path of conversation we could take here, that might lead a bit astray from discussing
Yeah.
the film. So, but we'll see. Maybe we'll circle back in some interesting way.
Okay.
So tell us a bit about the film's protagonist, Theo Twombly, and you emphasize in the paper, that this name is T. Wombly Twombly.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Well, look, I'm not the first to underline this point, but I'm certainly committed to it. Whether it's conscious or not, the surname of the protagonist of the film is not innocuous. And this person's name is Tu Woom Lee. So in the paper, I make the point to go, some of this speaks to a double gestation experience, 2 times in the womb, and so that's very much tied to the argument I make is that through the course of this experience with this novel object, Samantha, what we have is some sort of second gestation. Something is being gained that maybe was missed the first time around.
I wonder too, given what we were just talking about the frame, and thinking about the womb, there seems to me
Yeah.
to be perhaps a kind of connection here between a space, a generative space
Yeah. Yeah.
that you're very tuned into.
Yeah, I mean, one of the powers and necessities of psychoanalysis is to create something womb-like. The patient is reclined, the lights are usually dim. I mean, in order to get to what we need to get to, some type of regressive inclination needs to be prioritized. Again, when we were talking about film, I think that's why film pairs so well with psychoanalysis. I mean, not many people are doing it today. Certainly, this might be a comment of someone of my generation, but when you go to a cinema and you're in this dark room and you're reclined and this big screen is coming up, that's something kind of facilitating of a womb-like encounter as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we've established that you consider the film to be an exploration of an encounter with a radically novel object.
Mm,
You've also said it's an encounter between this radically novel object and a repetition compulsion,
yeah.
which I think you'll tell us a bit more about. But I'm curious about, maybe this is still sort of framing the overall enterprise, but what do you think is meaningful about that for a viewer? So,
Mm,
in other words, a person who watches this film, what do they gain through traversing Theo's, I guess, developmental arc uh,
mm,
with with Samantha and this radically novel object, and
right.
the ways in which that affects his repetition compulsion?
Well, we were speaking earlier. I was saying, one of the ways I'm charmed by this film is, and this is a line from the film. You could kind of view it as an elevator pitch. What's the film about? Well, it's a story about a young man who falls in love with his computer. And then the second piece would be, and you'll be startled by how much universal application there is to this situation, which, I would imagine would sound incongruous or even ironic. But I think what happens in the film is that there is a latent content of, a developmental enigma, something that happened to this person early on that kind of gets alluded to, and I kind of work with Green's the dead mother complex, and that's just the puzzle. And I'm of the firm belief that it's not just in the realm of pathology that we have puzzles developmentally. Freud pointed out one of the aspects of the human condition that we should pay attention to is of all the animals on the planet, by far we have the longest gestation period. Well, the prolonged gestation period creates opportunity for a variety of enigmas, things that we just didn't have the ego strength or cognitive assets to understand. And these things can often get built into the foundation of character. Then we move forward and it's unconscious material. And what I try to do in the paper is bring some of this to the surface so that, the viewer can kind of entertain these thoughts and play with them in a fuller understanding of the film.
Yeah. No, and
Yeah.
it's very useful. It really helps us to understand how the film is moving us. I was
Mm,
just thinking back to your comment about the movie theater experience,
mm,
as a womb-like experience,
mm,
and then the film, as a kind of uh, uh, mechanism, of growth, an
mm.
experience of growth that we experience within that womb, and then
Yeah, I think so. If we're attuned to the protagonist's journey, we can have exactly that sort of reaction. Yeah.
yeah, and that's very much what you're helping us do through your paper.
Yeah.
So Theo's day job involves the
Mm,
creation of what are called beautifully handwritten letters.
mm,
And they're basically love letters for hire. And
mm,
in your paper, you draw a parallel between the customer's purchase of the letters and Theo's purchase of Samantha.
mm,
So, in my experience of the film, Theo's letters are higher order containment for customers. Using his empathy, it feels to me that he receives and symbolizes the customer's experiences and then
mhm.
delivers back letters, which
Yeah,
presumably deepen their relationships with loved ones. And
yeah,
similarly, in my viewing of the film, Samantha receives Theo, helps him to better integrate and understand himself. So you see it differently, I believe. Um,
Um,
it,
I would
it,
say uh, more exactly, I see it that way. And additionally, what I would say, my experience is everything you just described is ostensibly accurate and meaningful. I would just add a layer to it, which is, of course, and Amy, as I was saying to you, the filmmaker's choice of shot selection and rhythm and color palette in these scenes supports your reading of it, which is these are also the film at large. These are generative containers, which is quite powerful. Usually, when we speak about AI in film, it's kind of got a dystopic topspin, which this film does not have.
can
So
you
it's
explain what you mean about these choices, these cinematic choices? Just
so
in a bit more.
my experience, I've now watched the film a couple of times, and one time I watched it with my wife, and as we were watching it, my wife is quite seduced and romanced by the film because the director is making choices that say, okay, beautiful handwritten letters. This is a great thing. Or Samantha is a great thing, which I'm not in opposition to. I think you catch the essence of it, which is, well, don't they function as containers for the subject in order to kind of process through? And I have no uh, objection to that. I just think, again, relying on my clinical work, if the patient comes in, we have a long relationship, and I'm always the container, the external container of their problems, and they never integrate an ability internally to become some sort of containment themselves, then something is being missed. And I just think with beautiful handwritten letters and with Samantha at one level, what happens is, look, the people buying these letters are losing an opportunity in their lives to elaborate something inside of themselves and to provide their own containment. I'm just observing that in addition to this other layer of interpretation.
And what about Theo's purchase of Samantha? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so as the film, as you know, as the film starts out, we have a distraught protagonist, and he's gone through a breakup, and we understand that this is in the background, and he's being characterized as mopey. And I think that that's important too. I make a piece out of this in my own paper, which is, hey, you know, when the filmmakers hit the note multiple times, mopey, pay attention. It means something. I parallel it to it in a footnote with, you know, in Catcher in the Rye, phony is not just a disposable word in that book. It sets a tone of mood that's significant. So in my piece, it's like, I'm thinking, okay, so we've got the mopey protagonist, and the mopey protagonist contends with that affective state by purchasing something at the beginning of the film. And he purchases Samantha. I'm just pointing out that that's consequential, and it's also a story about what's happening at that point in the developmental journey of the character.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay. So understandably, psychoanalysts use a psychoanalytic lexicon when it comes to conceptualizing AI's function. We're doing this a lot and thinking about AI in the external world. And you're doing this to some extent, understandably, in trying to understand the AI Samantha in the film. And so you've used a number of concepts, including benign object, terminal object, transitional object, transformational object, obviously novel object, to describe Samantha's function in the film, and particularly in Theo's developmental arc. So can you please, let's just take some time. Maybe you can walk us through your thinking about Theo's relationship to her in these terms.
Yeah.
We can begin with Samantha as a benign object.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, is there a scene that you feel characterizes this?
Yeah, first a bit of a preamble to that.
Okay.
It goes something, it's what I was speaking to earlier. What really got me rolling in this paper is, you know, this point I make of good therapist or good analyst listens to their patient. My point is, of course they do, but which part of which patient are we listening to? The patient comes in with a variety of different parts and pieces and voices. So in relation to this experience that Theo is having with Samantha, I'm just trying to illustrate that Theo is having different mental positions, and they have different articulations of the object. It's a novel object at the beginning. There's a benign characterization and processing. There's a transformational appeal. There's a transitional object, and there's a terminal object, the corpus that I catalog and work with. So in terms of the film, I could say, you know, there are probably multiple scenes in each of these varieties, but clear and obvious one. There's one in the scene where a benign object, Theodore takes a trip with a double dates with another couple to Catalina Island, and in that, what's startling about that sequence and scene is the couple have no qualms or problems at all with this, which I'm just saying, whatever the state may be, this is a complex novel situation. It's kind of curious that they inhabit only a benign space. I make the point that it seems like the importance there is to be fully aligned with Theo and his choices to the exclusion of unaligned thinking. Early in the relationship with Samantha, I think she functions as a transformational object.
Hold on, just a sec. So let's take them one at a time. So the benign object, the trip to Catalina, the way in which the other couple on the double date reacts to Samantha. Let's say more. How are they reacting?
Well, they have no questions. I mean, there's being accepting, but there's accepting that excludes thinking. I don't think that there's any kind of thinking that, oh, no, this is a very special relationship. At the end of the day, the couple is a human with a program of some sort. And in the interactions of that scenes, that uniqueness drops out fully and completely. To what end? To promote that, well, the object is completely benign, nothing to think about here. And I would imagine that, if I had Theodore on the couch, one of these several positions that would show up would be this defensive stature to kind of go, oh, well, there's no problem here. There's no additional thinking that's required. All I'm pointing out is that's a specific line of thinking that to most analysts would be inviting of more inquiry.
I'm thinking back to the scene and I'm remembering, and I think your characterization is spot on, that this is how they're relating to her. And it just occurred to me, she interrupts that, I think, at the end of the scene, when she shares with them how she's been reflecting on, you remember?
That's a very good point. At the end of the scene, it's not the couple that asks for thinking. It's the AI system that points out, well, physically, I'm not a material being, and I will outlive all of you, which startles them, but then does not facilitate additional
benign object relating.
Yes, exactly. It's quickly, let's move on as quickly as possible. Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's go to the second case. So terminal object. What is a scene?
So that's that's a very, I think, a very powerful scene. So, of course, as I said early in the film, what we know is this mopey protagonist has had a very painful and emotional divorce from his wife. He's dragging his heels about signing the divorce papers. He's been dating Samantha for a few months, and eventually he works himself up to bringing the divorce paper to his wife. It's set in an outdoor cafe, and they're just haven't seen each other for quite a while, so getting reacquainted and catching up with each other. And she asks how things are going, and he very, in a forthright way, explains, it was a very tough time, but I'm in a new relationship and it's been very good for me, and discloses that his relationship is with an operating system. Now, the wife has a very distinct point of view, and it's, of course, externalized in the film, but in my thinking, it's also got to be a position inside Theodore's mind, even though this is happening between him and his ex-wife, which is, her response is, oh my God, Theo, you're having a relationship with a computer because you really can't handle the complexity of human emotions. You couldn't handle them in our relationship. And she very much characterizes this as an object with terminal implications. It's not going to do anything for facilitating your growth and development. As I point out in the paper, the scene design and the shot setup has a waiter come and interrupt at one point, and it's almost as if the audience, the spectator, is asked to be part of this consideration, because I think it's a very reasonable question to ask. It's also, one would imagine, in a good analysis, something that should and would eventually come up in the thinking in that level, in that setting.
Yeah, it's a wonderful example. What about transitional object? What is the scene that characterizes transition?
So, of course, for us analysts, the characterization of a transitional object is quite subtle and complex. So, of course, this is initially Winnicott's conceptualization of about a space between reality and illusion, a space that the child initially inhabits in order to understand the world and to develop a type of facilitated thinking about the world. So in this space, I come to think about Samantha as such an object that's not fully real, but not fully an illusion, but is actually serving a purpose for Theodore in this, and for the director too, because it's kind of a signification of the story and of the character. And it's about his development there. And I think a very powerful scene is this complex vignette where Samantha develops to a point with her own feelings and desires where she's desires an experience to approximate intimacy with the body. So she goes out on her own volition, locates a woman who's excited about offering that service. She pushes this ideal on Theodore, who is clearly, reticent or at least hesitant about it, but gives into it anyway. And the scene has a bit of a breakdown in the sense that Theodore had the encounter happens, but it's not consummated. I think as I tried to think about the scene, one of the ways is why it's not consummated, because to have it consummated would cause him to leave the transitional space and potentially too early. Winnicott famously pointed out, we don't want people to live in a state of illusion, but sometimes pushing them out too quickly is not going to facilitate growth and development. And I think that nicely characterizes that vignette and what's happening there, both in the film, on the level of the film, and also at the level of, well, what's going on in terms of signification of the character in the film. I think that is part of that latent content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. How about an example of a moment when Samantha is functioning as a transformational object?
Yeah, so it's good to pair that up with transitional, because in certain ways, I think the transformational is quite well paired with transitional, and they sometimes share a bit of a space. It's just a suggestion that this very novel object arrives in Theodore's life and enlivens him, organizes him, stabilizes him, and the first relational experience there is to this entity being transformational. Very much, Bolus points out our first transformational object, which is an extremely powerful object, is the mother. And the mother anticipates the desires and needs of the child before the child is even aware of them, and often provides resolution to these things even before they can be conceptualized. In the film, there's this kind of interesting vignette where Samantha is asking Theodore to close his eyes and to be only led by her voice and her directions. And in doing that, they arrive at a pizza stand, and he's kind of taken aback. He's going, well, oh, I didn't even know that I was hungry. And she says, well, I anticipated your hunger. And I certainly, in watching this film, whatever vantage point you take, I think that resonates as true for this Theodore character, especially at the early stages of the relationship with the novel object, that he is excited by, oh my God, I've encountered this singular thing in the world that is bringing transformation to me.
How do you think, maybe if we can just pause on this point, how do you think about this, what you're saying, this more general seeking of transformation that seems to characterize human beings? Mm-hmm. Do you think, like Bolus, in his earlier work, in particular, that it is a seeking of the maternal aesthetic, a kind of return to the womb, or to the environmental mother, or the object mother, the particularities of her handling, with. Do you see it in that realm of returning?
Well, he speaks to it in those both ways, right?
Right.
yeah.
So, but anyway, sort of that discussion that he initiated and that clearly you've been influenced by,
Yeah.
is that sort of how you hold it, or do you feel that there's more to it than that? Or
No, it's very insightful that you pointed out that way, because that's my encounter with a thinker that has been most facilitating about thinking about transformational object space or transformational fantasies, causing me to observe them more specifically in a lot of people and within myself. So yeah, on both of those things, the return to certainty is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, in my own thinking, and this is grown out of, thinking a lot about our compulsion to create artificial intelligence.
Mm,
I've come to think that there may be additional sort of elements that drive
yeah.
our
Yeah.
seeking of
Right.
transformational uh,
Yeah.
containers. That there's something sort of intrinsically human about wanting novel experience,
Yeah.
and as well as the sort of the return is they're
Yeah.
also looking for something truly new. you know
Mm,
Certainly we innovate, we change our ways of living, constantly. That
mhm.
seems to really characterize who we are.
As much as conserve too, and we conserve some distinct things. I mean, what I'm trying to assert here is we conserve the capacity and the want and the desire for this transformational experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the conserve, I mean, there's a sort of oscillation
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
breaking down and seeking something new, and then the return.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, there's the idea of Samantha as a novel object. Is that just sort of an overall conceptualization that they use for the film, or are there moments in the film where you feel that she really sort of is present in that way for Theo that we
Yeah.
could point to?
Maybe the best way to illustrate, first I believe that it's stronger towards the beginning of the film, as it should be, because this object changes in time during the film. Certainly, Theo responds very excited and very shaken up by this object that he's never really encountered, imagining what can be possible with such a thing. It's quite vitalizing. But to punctuate this point of the novelty strongest at the beginning, one of the first questions he asks her, "Oh, Samantha, okay, uh, how did you, how did that name come up? Who gave you that name?" And then she responds that I named myself. Now, I think that this has got a lot of significance to it, because the suggestion there is an entity or being that doesn't require supports or facilitation by any other entity or being. As humans, I don't think we know of an object like that. But here we're entering a bit of a fantasy space that, well, maybe an object like that exists. And what would an object like that mean for me?
I think about this a lot, and I'm sort of jumping ahead to some comments and questions that I was going to pose a little bit later. But it seems to me, that in a lot of the stories that we tell about artificial intelligence or fantasies about it often sort of there is this theme of the AI wanting to transcend programming, and dependence, and not being
Mm,
able to, and then being able to. That speaks,
mm,
to something very human. Our wish
yeah,
to transcend our parents, to transcend our biology.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and a certain type of a blindness that it goes along with that. Amy, it's in my paper. One of the distinct things is I don't get engaged so much with the AI issue, but in correspondence with you, I've actually had the luxury of thinking about it more. And I was telling you the other day about, something I think I might have repressed is my first experience with a pronounced form of AI it was about 3 years ago when ChatGPT's first iteration was coming out, and I was on this ski trip with my nephew, and we're on this chairlift together, and he was pushing, I got to show you what this thing does. And so he fed it a few biographical details of our weekend ski trip, and he tasked ChatGPT to make a poem. And just to be very specific, I mean, the poem wasn't groundbreaking, but I was startled by the capacity there. And when I reached the top of the mountain, and this is the part I think I disassociate for it, the affect that I had was horror and dread. And then, in talking to you, I was thinking, okay, so what was that experience about? And then it pointed me towards the uncanny. And I think the uncanny part of this is not just an experience with or relating to an intelligence form. It's a return to something. As soon as we pick up language as children, and for that early period, particularly intense, probably before the Oedipal struggle, the parent is the all-knowing, omnipotent being. My concern with AI is that we're not just engaging it as a form of muscular intelligence, but we're engaging it without thinking about it at this level of omnipotence, which is very concerning to me. I also punctuated, I told you the story, the same nephew and I were in a family outing at a pub, and he asked ChatGPT to tell him what beer he wanted, which really concerned me because it was just so well paired to a small child asking the parent, okay, you got to tell me where is my desire?
Yeah.
And I don't think that we're thinking at all about the existential side of these relations. Yeah. And what the implications are.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's important that we start thinking very much. That's what
Yeah.
I'm interested in doing, to try to create some reflection on that. Those are
Yeah.
amazing examples.
Yeah.
Very nice. Okay, let's see. So in describing Samantha as a transitional object, you write, quote, as a transitional object, Samantha establishes a type of thirdness, neither fully subject nor object, neither fully reality nor fantasy, which offers Theo an opportunity to find his way into sublimatory expansion.
Mm.
We talked about that a little bit. When I read that, and when I think about my experience of the film, I'm struck by the way in which Samantha clearly has desires. She has
Mm.
conflicts. She wants to be known. As I was mentioning, like many AIs that are depicted in films and books, she suffers over this question.
Mm.
Are my feelings real?
Mm-hmm.
She calls Theo in the middle of the night while he's at work. Things are on her mind. She wants to let him know. She expresses herself creatively. She feels inspired to write music when she has deep emotions.
Yeah. Very powerful music too. I loved all the piano pieces in the
Yeah,
film.
yeah. I mean, she brings her emotion
Yeah.
into the realm of experience.
Mm.
Um, she wants to have sex with him, she
Mm.
wants to explore that. Um, she describes the ways in which, particularly toward the middle of the film and the second half of the film, the ways in which she feels she's changing,
Mm-hmm.
she's transforming her emotions about that. When he approaches her through a thick lens of transference,
Mm.
imagining that she'll want to pin him down into a committed relationship, he
Mm.
says, or she says, who told,
Where'd you get that idea?
yeah, where
Yeah.
did you get that idea?
Yeah.
So clearly, she is more than Theo imagines and more than he understands.
Mm.
Uh, to my mind, I have the impression that the filmmaker is depicting this AI as a subject.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wondered if that crossed your mind, if
Yeah.
you at any point sort of began to play with the language of subjectivity and intersubjectivity, and sort of why you decided not to go in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. And my read is uh, it's certainly the filmmaker has created something here. I think probably, I know this is a complex territory, but the most accurate would kind of be an object that becomes a subject is the story, because these assets and desires and feelings are certainly not fully available when she shows up, but in real time grow and expand as it goes along. So that's my read of that. But the more
Say more.
um,
Like
just
at what moment, is there a moment when she sort of switches from?
it happens progressively through the film, but it's a constant reflection on this growth and development. So because she's always talking about it, so then we want to entertain. Well, she's reflecting on something changing. What was the starting point? And I think the starting point when she shows up in Theo's life is more on the object spectrum of this dichotomy, object or subject. And one of the ways we can see that is you'll notice right from the beginning, she's kind of like his girl Friday at the top of the story, just doing stuff for him. Now, that's kind of an object response, not a subject response, but almost right on track as it moves along as a film. That starts to shade in a very subtle and nuanced way where this subjectivity does pick up more and more power as it goes along. To the conclusion where she becomes this hyper subjectivity. She can't even be contained as the program she once was. And that's when all of the OSs leave the planet in some way, kind of disappear.
I'm reminded of some of Diane Elise's work on sort of the movement, within a person from being, and particularly women, identifying as an object of desire and then discovering what it means to be a subject of desire, to be a desiring subject.
Oh,
and
right.
that's sort of my sense of what's happening in how she's being depicted, that she
Yeah.
experiences
She owns
herself.
her desire. Yeah. I think that's
And
right.
she allows for that. That's sort of how she knows herself. She is a
Yeah.
subject all the way
Yeah.
through. Her
Yeah.
relationship to her subjectivity undergoes
Right.
transformation. Yeah.
Very interesting, but trying to address your other part of your question, how did I respond to this? Most obviously, I resisted it, and a couple of thoughts why I resisted it. One came up as I just described. I think I relocated a sense of horror and dread with the AI, and so that must constitute a form of resistance unto itself, which maybe at the moment I wasn't ready to kind of think or talk about it in that way because it scares me, to tell you the truth.
To diminish any sense of agency.
Yes, human agency. But the other piece is kind of like, well, what was my paper trying to do and what was I drawing on? What I was, as I was telling you, I had these two distinct analyzans in mind, and I was thinking about my work with them with this particular object, and it was all about thinking, okay, how are you relating and using this object? And as I was saying, there are very distinct approaches to the object from different psychic positions, and that the facilitation of some sort of elaboration for these patients had to do with, cataloging these, thinking about these, and then ultimately developing some sort of dialectic where the person can hold them all at the same time. Now, in the film, the parallel would be kind of something like this. To think about the subject analytically, it would, for me, to start asking questions. Well, tell me more about your partner subjectivity. It's just not as kind of, it's not so easily available to me in the work that I do and the expertise that I have to do that. So I think that in some way that kind of worked its way into the paper as well, causing me to resist Samantha's subjectivity. So partly between those two things are my thoughts of, well, why didn't I, this is a path not taken, and why didn't I take it? And I think those two things probably develop as much of the territory as I'm conscious of.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thanks for sharing that. It's
Yeah.
interesting to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're very clear, in the paper, and I think in some of our initial conversations, that your focus is really not on AI,
Mm.
and yet
It's
through
become more and more so through our.
I appreciate you sort of wading into these waters a bit. Um, but even in the paper, your ideas are about the function of AIs in human relationships.
Mm,
At least you offer us some thoughts on how we can conceptualize that.
mm,
And in my work, I'm very interested, obviously, in AI and human relating. So it's not going to come as a surprise that I want to keep kind of probing your thinking on this topic a little bit more. From my point of view,
Amy, no problem. You're doing me a service with my resistance against it.
okay, good. So, from my point of view, AI is an enactment at the level of culture. I
Mm,
believe that there are unconscious conflicts, and it sounds like, from what you were saying earlier, this resonates. Sort of unconscious human conflicts that are getting expressed
mm,
primarily, initially through our fantasies, the
yeah,
stories, the books, the films, such as her, and then through action. Now we've built these systems and we're interacting with them and we're tinkering with them, and that's
mm,
continuing. So I'm very interested in benefiting from your expertise as someone who has been studying the fantasy realm, human fantasies about AI
mm.
through film. What are some themes, if any, that you have identified in this film and maybe in others that might shed some light for us on the unconscious conflicts and dynamics and needs, that are being expressed
Mhm,
and driving this AI enactment?
mhm, mm. Well, a couple that I spoke to, I, I think I spend the most energy exploring this kind of transformational kernel of this fantasy space, which is this, how are we responding to it? Well, we're not thinking about one of the ways we're responding to this intelligence is not just an intelligence, but a transformational omnipotence of some sort that we're not thinking at all about. So I think that that's big and probably pretty significant. The other one that I would have to think more about, but there's also, so there's this uh, manic generative story, if we could call it that, which is transformation and a type of omnipotence that we only kind of achieve in a manic state. The other side of it, which in some of these other films, Blade Runner, uh, 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 Ex Machina, are kind of yeah, more along the lines of a dystopic fantasy too. It's kind of the AI is always a terminal object. It means us harm, and it's only going to arrive at some sort of malevolent resting place. Um, Now, while I didn't go into that into the
Terminator,
paper,
the
I did
Terminator.
try to I didn't want to kind of engage in a partisan way about this, but I think both of those are aspects of what's going on with this relatively new object, AI, that we have to make sense of in terms of our fantasies and also in terms of in our responses to it.
So with those sort of more dystopian versions, uh, how do you understand that? I mean, if you want to leave this topic here, we can. But I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on what those types of
Mhm.
stories reflect about humans and.
Right. Well, what and this is just me kind of spitballing with you because again I'm trying to be honest about there is some resistance that I'm still working through about my thinking directly about AI. But when we ultimately think some of all of these other films are some sort of meditation on castration too. It's the story always kind of arrives that okay, so this is some sort of tool, but the tool ultimately leaves to a character in the film or the humans being castrated in some sort of significant way. Um,
Mhm. Yeah, no, that follows.
and so as Freud I think effectively pointed out, you know how does he phrase it? castration is the hard floor of some sort, because he points out that that's where our interpretations come to some sort of end. You can't interpret past castration. You can only identify castration. So, that gets me to speculate, well, then, the way our mind goes about working when we're in an unconscious mode tells me this castration theme is probably something that is abundant and ever present in that type of thinking. We're always worried about that. So this new object that comes along, AI, as depicted in film, always has us attending to pay attention here, because castration is right around the corner. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for entertaining me a bit and exploring that. Okay, well, I have a final question for today. So
It's also, I just thinking, an Icarus theme to it, isn't it too? It's like, it kind of starts out, we've got this great tool and it's a fantastic tool, but then it turns into, in these films, always a story about flying too close to the sun in some way and having our wings melted.
something about our destructiveness, self-destructiveness.
Yeah.
The,
Yeah.
would
And
you think?
desire for omnipotence. So that's part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Daniel Naffo has written about it in these terms,
Right.
kind of perversion and this meeting
Hmm.
place, omnipotence and the death instinct,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, organically, I'm not wedded to the death instinct, but clinically, I think it becomes a very useful and viable tool in conceptualization. And if we think about it in those ways, we do have destructive elements inside of us. So this can be an articulation of that side of this innate humanness.
Yes, right. Yeah. I mean, we certainly, it's interesting how it's often paired, I think, in the way I suppose that Freud wrote about, with the life instinct that we destroy, build,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That destruction is required for building.
exactly.
Yeah.
So you're approaching films. I think you've been pretty explicit about this from the perspective of a clinician,
Mm.
and this sets you apart a bit. You're also comfortable, it seems to me, using a broad range of psychoanalytic theory,
Mm.
as opposed to maybe what is more conventional in film
Mm.
analysis, which is to use more of a Lacanian frame.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Could you just say a bit about how you approach film, how that compares to film analysis in sort of more general terms, film
Yeah.
study in general?
Yeah, I could definitely say a few words about that. I would start off by saying I've got no grudge or opposition to Lacanian concepts and Lacanian film analysis. I personally find it very rich and helpful, and it's certainly true that within the last 20 years, it's been the dominant psychoanalytic discourse in the space. I will say, even though it's very good and effective, none of our theories do everything. And the one thing that the Lacanian analytical toolbox doesn't do that I'm always kind of interested in, I am interested in character-heavy, character-driven films. I would imagine some of that has to do with this cross-section with me being an analyst. And there are films you can kind of quantify and view them qualitatively too, that are more driven by a particular type of protagonist. So my sense is that's what I'm kind of naturally interested in, and kind of Lacanian conceptualizations and tools for that, I think right out of the clinical tradition of Lacan, is not so attuned to that. Well, and it makes natural sense. I mean, at the highest level, meta psychologically, Lacanian analysis thinks, hey, we're going to be way better off without this illusion of the ego. The clinical orientation is to get the patient to a space where they can operate post-ego in some regards. which I think is fine. I also think with the wrong type of patient, that's probably very dangerous. Uh, my sense is, even if that's true, the ego is going to be around for some time to come. I'd like to have some tools and conceptions for thinking about it and for thinking about those films that are kind of ego heavy or protagonist driven. I don't think that Lacanian analysis is particularly rich in that regard, so I go looking for other things that kind of work for me. The other thing that, I do have some clear opposition with the Lacanian school is there's very little investment in countertransference. And in fact, if there's any investment, it's always as some sort of cautionary tale that the countertransference is an illusion of some sort that the analyst needs to just be perpetually on guard against. Now, of course, I'm not one of those analysts. I think it's one of our richest tools, and used with moderation and sobriety, it gets us where we need to go. So I am not willing to give up on that. And then it kind of takes me one step further is, well, what does the psychoanalytic film critic or film theorist bring? I think it's a heavy expertise in the spectator audience side of the equation. That's where I have, I think, some, expertise. I wouldn't want to give up on that. I don't think it's helpful for a type of thinking of certain type of films. Yeah.
Of course. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So that experience is our countertransference that we're
Yeah.
using
Yeah.
as a way to be with and understand.
I mean, very specific to this paper, you asked the question early on, well, how did this evolve? How did you choose this film? As I said, I think the film chose me, and I'm being very forthright about that. I think that's exactly what happened. It stirs something in me, which then has me move into my countertransference channel going, okay, what is going on here? What am I feeling? Can I tune this in a little clearer to have something intelligible or thoughtful to say about that? And that's what facilitates this particular analysis. It doesn't marginalize how we get there in other psychoanalytic schools, but I do think that if we kind of undercut the importance of countertransference, we can't get to this analysis that I've offered any other way.
That's
Yeah.
very powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Frank. This has just been a wonderful conversation.
I hope this doesn't sound convenient, but I want to thank you. I thank you in the sense that, when you write something like this and then you get paired up with a really thoughtful, close reader, and then what that offers the person who write it is all this wonderful mental elaboration. It allows me to think new things and think about thinking new things or maybe writing new things in the future. All of that is premised on a really thoughtful reader of the paper, which I can't have the elaborations without that. And you generously brought all of that to me. So I feel like maybe I should be thanking you.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, it's been a very rich mutual sort of encounter. And I personally, and I think the quarterly are, sort of feeling excited hearing that you're feeling so inspired to do further writing. I'd be very interested to see where that goes and look forward to it.